Dr. Karen Sullivan-Vance serves as the Associate Director for Strategic Program Development in the Executive Office for NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising. Prior to coming to the NACADA Executive Office, Karen served as the Associate Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Prior to that, she was the Director of Academic Advising and Learning Center at Western Oregon University and was an academic advisor in the College of Liberal Arts and the College of Education at Oregon State University. Karen has been active in NACADA, serving in a variety of leadership positions, including the Board of Directors, Chair of the International Conference Advisory Board, Chair of the Global Initiatives Committee, and Chair of Region 8. She serves as a consultant and speaker for NACADA's Academic Advising Consultants and Speakers Services. She presents regionally, nationally, and internationally on topics related to academic advising, first-generation students, and student success. Karen is a proud first-generation college graduate. She earned her bachelor's in English literature from the University of Puget Sound, her master's in college student services administration from Oregon State University, and her doctorate in educational leadership at Portland State University, where her dissertation focused on foster youth assessing higher education through community college. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, Matt and Colin. Great to be here.
We are delighted to be chatting to you today, Karen. And Matt has outlined, a very distinguished bio there. I suppose, that kind of talks to the what you've done. And there is lots of that which we'll delve into. But we always like to start these in to talk to you, I suppose, about, your path into higher ed and how you came to be where you are today. Was it something that you always wanted to work in the field of higher ed, or how did you find yourself where you are today, Karen?
Thanks, Colin. I was your typical undecided student that had no idea what I wanted to major in. And so to give you some backstory, I was first generation student. I come from a working class, blue collar background. My father was in the military. My mother was from London. They met when my dad was overseas. I was born overseas. I spent most of my childhood in England. And I didn't have anybody in my life who'd been to university, except that I knew that I wanted to go. I remember my dad, after he got out of the military, he was a letter carrier. He was a postman. And I remember him coming home when I was in high school, just exhausted because he was carrying a 65-pound pack and saying to me, it's a lot easier to earn your living sitting at a desk than it is on your feet all day. And that really stuck with me that neither of my parents had opportunities. So my father grew up very poor in Mississippi. My American grandfather was illiterate. My mother was a child of World War II. She was evacuated from London during the war, and so her education was cut off. So there were very bright people that just didn't have the opportunities to go to school. And they fostered education in me. They talked about how important education was. They were self-taught learners. They constantly read. There was always discussions at the dinner table. And so I knew I wanted to go to university. I just didn't know what happened when you got there or what happened when you got out. And so I was accepted into the University of Puget Sound. Always a logger, go loggers. And it was a great experience. It was a very intellectually demanding institution. But I did not have, this was years ago, this was in the 80s. There really wasn't academic advising. My faculty advisor was a wonderful woman, but what she did for me was more get me into closed classes. It was very transactional. It was all about scheduling. There were never conversations about what are you going to do after graduation. And so like most first generation students or many first generation students, I was very linear, like what can I major in that will lead to a job? So I had a facility for languages. So I first thought about studying languages and doing translations, but I realized I loved language, but I didn't have a passion for it for a career. And then I thought I would do business, and I took microeconomics, which to this day is still the worst grade I've ever had in my life. I passed, but just barely. I'll own it. It was a D. It was the worst grade I ever got. And I realized that business was probably not going to be my route. And so then I thought, I was approaching my junior year. You have to make a decision. You have to commit to something. So I was going to be a teacher. And I spent 2 days in teacher ed and thought, what am I going to, I'm going to be 5 years older than the students I'm teaching. What am I going to tell them? I have nothing to share with them. And I can remember calling my dad on the phone crying, like, what am I going to do? And this was one of the best gifts my parents ever gave me. My dad said, study what you love and worry about the job later. And he asked me, what do you love? And I said, well, I love literature, but you can't get a job in that. I was going to pay you to read a book. And so so I ended up studying literature, and I focused on Victorian Edwardian literature. I minored in French, and I got out, and ironically, my first job was in the business world. I worked for a seafood consulting firm in Seattle, and it just didn't fill something within me. And about 2 years later, I got the opportunity to be an admissions counselor at a college, a small private college. And I loved it. I did that for 5 years, was on the road constantly. And it was great. You know, Hawaii was one of my territories, so you can't really complain when you're going, I'm going to Hawaii to work. It doesn't, nobody feels sorry for you. And especially in November in the Pacific Northwest, there's no sympathy for you at that point. But I did that for about 5 years and kind of burned out being on the road so much. And ended up moving to Pennsylvania, was working at a 2-year institution with non-traditional students, so adult students, and ended up doing advising on the side. So I had part-time students who nobody was advising. And I knew nothing about advising, but I had the checklist. And so it was very transactional. And I did that for a few years, and then I moved to Oregon, and I got a job in the College of Liberal Arts at Oregon State University. And that's when it just kind of like this is the best thing ever. This is my passion. I love advising. And that's how I got connected into NACADA.
That's great advice that you were given in terms of like study what you love and then worry about the job later. But I can see how that can also scare people at the same time. Well, you don't want me thinking about that? It's like, well, you'll get to it when you get to it, but you need to find what you're passionate about and study that. And I feel like this is always a question I think we should be asking when we're at conferences or whatnot. Usually we're asking, where do you work? What do you do? But I think if we ask that question, how'd you get into advising? What's your path? You find out so much more. And I think I've learned more about you in this one question right now than the whole time that I've known you. So
absolutely, Matt. And I think there's also a generational aspect because I'm older than both of you. And so when I came into advising, what you found in advising at that time was you found people who just kind of fallen into it. Mm-hmm. Or you had, a faculty member that was just sort of doing it on the side. It was not like a defined career path that it is now, where you have students who in their undergraduate are already identifying, I want to go get a master's degree and I want to become an academic advisor. I mean, mine was, I just sort of fell into it. And then when I was at Oregon State, I realized that employees coming up all had master's degrees, and I was going to have to challenge myself and get a master's degree and move up. And so that's what I did. I did my master's while I was there.
And so one of the things you mentioned is, being part of NACADA. And when you accepted your current position at NACADA, you had wrote on social media that you were thrilled to be joining the incredible team at the EO, but also the opportunity to serve an association which has had such a positive impact on your life, and that it was kind of like a new chapter. So I guess from that, how has your first year gone so far with the EO, and how has NACADA had a positive impact on your life?
So I think I have to answer the last part first. So when I was at Oregon State, there was not, this was, we're talking 2 decades ago. There was not a lot of training and development for advisors, and that has certainly changed over the years. It's very robust now. And I got connected to NACADA, and it was just like this incredible opportunity. It was this incredible feeling of community. There were other people who felt passionate about supporting students and helping students. I wanted to give students the advice that I didn't get. When I think about being a first-generation student, for me, back in the day, nobody talked about it. Nobody even labeled, I didn't know there was a label for it. I didn't know there was a name for it. And what it felt like was that everybody had a playbook that I didn't have. Like, people knew things that I didn't know. And so I often think about, if I had known some of the information I learned later in life, how would that have changed my trajectory in life? And maybe it wouldn't have taken me 16 years to go and get a master's degree between bachelor's and master's. So I think what it did is it opened up this sense of community. It provided me with opportunities for training and development and to really push myself about there are, like I can write and I can publish and I can do presentations and I can learn from other people. And I can, the great thing about NACADA is the sharing. Advisors are so willing to share what they're doing with each other. And so I can take that back to my institution and maybe we can implement that. So it provided me all of those, really that foundation to grow and learn and develop as an advisor. And then as I started getting involved in leadership opportunities, it really provided the leadership training that I hadn't had. So it was giving me opportunities as a frontline advisor to develop leadership, which helped me grow and develop and eventually become an associate vice provost. And so I attribute that back to NACADA. How has my first year been? It's been incredible. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. I was very sad to leave Tennessee Knoxville because I loved the team of people I worked with. They were incredible. But NACADA had always been a goal for me. It had always been, not really a goal, it had been a dream. It was something where I thought, I'd love to work for NACADA, but I don't know that my life will sort of, that the stars will align in the right way to allow that to happen. And it happened last spring. The job came open last spring, and I thought, this may be my only opportunity. And I really want to be able to give back. And I think that was important to me. There were a lot of individuals as I was coming up, mentors who, like Nancy King and Jane Drake and Susan Campbell, Eric White, and Charlie Nutt, of course, who really supported my growth and development. And I thought this was an opportunity for me to give back to that next generation of advisors in supporting them. So it's been, the stars aligned. My house in Tennessee sold in less than a day. Moved in the middle of a pandemic, which was a bizarre situation to do. It's really strange staying at hotels where nobody's at. And then I managed to get COVID in November. So it's been a strange first year, but it's also been incredible just to see, I think, the membership adapt, to see the conferences we've been able to put online and have them be virtual to make sure that people are getting those opportunities to continue their development. And it's been great to work with the EO staff. I've worked with them for years as a member, so to have that opportunity to work with them as colleagues has just been fantastic.
And I suppose one of the things that it was interesting, because you mentioned about being an admissions counselor and being on the road. And that has served you well, I think, in many different roles, because you have been out on the road, I suppose, spreading the word about NACADA. I know that you have been very involved with UCAT, even stepping in at one point to give the keynote at the last moment. So I'd like to know about that, but also, I suppose, just about that time, because you've been, I believe, in China as well, and I'm sure other locations. So just about that experience of kind of traveling, about meeting with academic advisors, personal tutors, or those involved in supporting students around the world. What has that experience been like, Karen?
So, Colm, it's been incredible. I think to get to meet members like you who are in different parts of the world, who are focused on student success and about supporting students, and those conversations about, whether we call it personal tutoring or academic advising or something else, it's that synergy, those connections we have, and really being able to share with each other what we're learning. The UCAT story, UCAT has been incredible. I mean, Penny Robinson, who is the founder of UCAT, just really, you have to have somebody who is really passionate to be able to start an association. And she managed to do that. It's now under the great direction of David Gray. And you are right about the conference presentation. I believe it was Sheffield. It was the first one. The speaker who was supposed to be coming had an issue. I think a family member was ill, if I remember correctly. And so jokingly at dinner, they mentioned you might have to give the keynote, because I had just given a keynote in Dubai for NACADA's international conference. And so we were all sort of joking about it. I didn't really think it was serious. I went to bed. I got up the next morning at like 8:10. They're like, okay, yeah, you're on. at 9. And so there I am, trying to change some of my PowerPoint slides, trying to get ready. And I remember walking up on the stage, and in the US, typically when you do a keynote, you do the keynote, people clap, and you walk off the stage. And as I was walking up, Penny was introducing me, and she suddenly said, "Oh, and I'm sure Karen would be happy to answer questions at the end of this." And all I could think of was like, what, wait, what? And so it was a great experience. It was fun. Charlie was in the back row giving me a thumbs up. And it was just it was an opportunity to be able to step in and help UCAT. And maybe sometime down the road, they'll invite me back when I can actually prepare a talk specifically for them. But that was a great experience. It's been phenomenal to see their growth and development in the last few years. It's just fantastic. And it speaks to the need that exists there. China was right before we all went into pandemic. So it was in the November of 2019. And so Wendy Troxel and I were invited to go to China, and Tsinghua University was doing the first advising conference, and it was fantastic. They had, created notebooks for people. We had interpreters. That was a new experience of saying a sentence and waiting for the interpreter to repeat after you. But it was a phenomenal experience. I will say it was the first time in my life, though, that I did get laryngitis. So after doing 4 presentations one day, the next day I had very little voice. So fortunately I had a microphone and kind of squeaked my way through it. But it was a great experience. Tsinghua were incredible hosts. And it was fantastic to just talk to their advisors, because advising is really starting to come into its own in China. And so it's really starting to grow and develop.
Yeah. Talk about adapting on the fly to do a keynote. Hey, you just woke up, but yeah, you really do need to do that keynote. So yes, you may have thought it was a joke, but I'm sure the other people that were mentioning it the night before, they were actually serious about it.
I know. I probably, that may have been one moment where I didn't completely read the room right, where I thought because I really did think that the speaker would be able to make it. But I think, again, that speaks to advisors. One of my colleagues years ago talked about advisors being great extemporaneous speakers, because when you think about students coming in, they'll come in to see you, and it's written down like they've got a question about a course, but then as you start having a conversation with them, all sorts of other things come out from it, and you've got to react to it. So fortunately, I had a keynote in my pocket, which was beneficial. So maybe the moral of that story is always have a prepared keynote or talk ready to go.
Well, actually, that's a really good point. So there's actually a public speaker. He's actually a world champion of public speaking through Toastmasters from, I think, 1999. Craig Valentine, and he always goes with the line of "Don't get ready, stay ready."
That's a good one.
Because when he won the championship, he's in the airport going home, and he's got like this big trophy, and a person comes up to him and reads the writing on the trophy, and it's like, "Oh, world champion of public speaking. Say some things." And that's kind of where it kind of came up with that line where it's like, you really have to be ready on the fly with whatever role that you're in. But you mentioned presenting in China, and that was 36 universities that were part of that conference. And I think Dr. Wendy Troxel said that both of you together had presented like 12 sessions at that conference. So I guess from that, how did that partnership come about with presenting at that conference at China, and how do things look now? I mean, now that we've gone through we're kind of still in this pandemic, but is that partnership still forged with China?
It is, Matt, and I think if anything, our partnerships have just continued to grow and get stronger in the pandemic. We've all been, in some regards, we've been forced to stop in terms of travel and going places. But we've had the connections online where we can meet with people. I know, my first connection with Yisi from Tsinghua was at one of the international conferences. Like, she came to it, she wanted to learn, she wanted to take that back. And then the next year, Yisi and her supervisor, Ray, came, and they've been to all the international conferences. And then Harriet has come. They actually received the very first in Hasselt, the very first Best of International a few years ago for their presentation. And they're doing some incredible work. They've done some great research where they've really looked at, how students are selecting courses and majors, and have done some really incredible original research around that. And so that has just continued as we've all gotten to know them. They've been at conferences. They have started participating more in NACADA. So I know Yisi has served on the Global Initiatives Committee. Harriet is on it now. So there's just been, I think those ties just keep strengthening as we go along.
And I suppose then, like in terms of the way in which we've talked about advising around the world, and the way in which people are invested in student success, and you mentioned earlier, I suppose, in relation to your own benefits from NACADA about professional development, but I know it's something that you have spoken on previously. And I suppose when we get to a point where the pandemic is still at different stages around the world, but we're facing now in towards a new academic year, whatever that looks like for different people around the world. But I suppose from your experience, Karen, and drawing both in terms of staff development, but also, helping students to negotiate the world we're in, what are your thoughts or advice that you might offer to listeners as we kind of begin a summer stage where we're planning for the next academic year?
So I think there's a couple of things, Colin. I mean, first I would speak to institutional administrators, and I'm not talking specifically advising directors. I'm talking higher up, provosts, presidents, chancellors. I think it's really important to recognize the work that academic advisors have done through this pandemic. As everyone changed swiftly last year and went to online, advisors suddenly found themselves at the forefront. So many other aspects of collegiate life were gone, and advisors were really the ones who were having conversations with students, who were trying to help them navigate and change, and they were also helping faculty members as well in that. And so I think they've done such a tremendous job in supporting students through this, and supporting students through difficult times. Like, do students have access to laptops? Do they have access to Wi-Fi hotspots? Do they, when they go home, what is that like? Is there space for them at home? What if they need to be out working? And even when you think about the advisors' experience, for a lot of them, some of them had their partners or spouses were essential workers. So they're worrying about them, they're trying to support their students, and they've got their children at home and they're trying to homeschool them. I mean, it's the balancing act that academic advisors have done in this past year has been incredible. And so I think that, it was wonderful for the Global Advising Week to see what institutions were doing to say thank you to advisors for that. And I think as we move into this new year, and you said it beautifully about the fact that, the world's going to be at all different stages. So maybe not every institution is going to be open. So how do we continue to support advisors who may be working remotely? Because they're the ones who are supporting students. So how do we help them? What are ways that we can look to support them? And I think part of it is that piece about recognizing that you can't do everything, and that you need to, in the process of something like this, take care of yourself. There are a lot of people who have lost loved ones over the past year. It's been a devastating pandemic financially for people. It's been, devastating in terms of health. For young, I have a niece who's 13. She spent the last year and a half not in school at a time that's a very social time in your life when you're trying to develop. And trying to learn on a laptop. And so I think giving everybody a little grace as we move forward, but trying to take moments where you're taking care of yourself, and where you are, whatever that is for you. I have a dog, and one of the great benefits of having a dog is they live in the moment. She has to go outside, which means I could literally sit in front of the computer for hours on end and not go anywhere, but she has to go outside. So it forces me to be in the moment, forces me to go out in nature, forces me to exercise. And so I think making sure that you're doing things for yourself that are good and healthy, recognizing you can't solve all the problems. And I think the other thing too is that advisors frequently are the first people that can see an issue, and that, that they can bring that up to administrations and let them know, like, we're seeing students who need X, Y, or Z. What kind of supports can we do?
Yeah, exactly like you said. But with advisors, I mean, the student is the first person to contact the advisor. The advisor then can bring that up to their boss or to the higher ups if there's some sort of issue, and then hopefully there can be some type of solution to it. But everything that you talked about was regarding the student and like what's the student's experience. And back in 2018, Brett McFarland had done a keynote for a UCAT conference in England, and he had said something that had an impact enough for you to post about it, where the quote was, "How does a student experience your university?" And I know that's from like 3 years ago, so not sure if you remember all the context that went with that quote. But what comes to mind when you hear that kind of question of how does a student experience your university? And do you think that's something as institutions or departments or as frontline staff, that's something that we sometimes forget to ask?
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think we do forget to ask that, and also even thinking about from advisor wellness, like how do your staff experience your institution? Do they feel cared for? Do they feel supported in what they're doing? Do they have the tools to be able to do what they're doing? But yeah, I think it comes back to when you think about the student experience. We know that there are going to be times where there can be disequilibrium when a student's making a transition. So just think about this freshman class coming in. They have spent the last year and a half, most of them, learning remotely. So all of those last high points of being in high school, so the prom and football games and homecoming and different events that just sort of kind of highlight and bookend your your K through 12 experience, they haven't had that. They've had drive-by graduations. They've had different people have adapted as well as they can. Now they're coming into the institution, and in some cases they're going to be there. Their families may still be worried about their wellness and their health. But how do we help them adjust? How do we help them adjust to going from being, I'm on a computer by myself seeing my classmates, to suddenly I'm in a classroom that may have 100 people in it, or 200 people, or a 600-person lecture hall. And so how do we help them adjust to that? And then how do we help them adjust to living in the residence halls? How do we get them engaged? I think that's, it's how are they experiencing your university? Do they feel connected? Do they feel that they matter? I love Schlossberg, love a little matter versus marginality, but it's so true. Do students feel that they are important? Because it's easy for students to feel like a number. And it's so important. We know, there's so much research about the need for students to connect with someone. And that could be somebody in the lunch line at the cafeteria who just says to you, Colin, how'd you do on your test today? It's somebody who just knows you and knows something about you and connects. So really, I think one of the things I used to frequently do when I was a frontline advisor, and then when I was a director and an administrator, is I would always go sit where the students sat. I wanted to see what was the perspective. So what was the perspective? Like, I never would have a student sit across the desk from me in my office. There was always a round table, because the desk can in some cases be sort of hierarchical, like I'm in charge, and so the desk was much more convivial and I think community focused, but also just to go across campus and to look at it through the eyes of your students. It was very beneficial when I did my doctorate. It was fascinating. I can remember standing in line. I was paying a bill, and there was somebody behind the counter, and they were having a bad day, and they were taking it out on a student. And it was all I could do to stop myself from saying, "You need to go take a break." But I didn't work there, and so that was probably a little bit too intrusive. But it's thinking about, like, that person was frustrated. They needed to come off the front line for a few minutes and take care of themselves. And then that student's experience at that moment was really negative. So thinking about, like, how, putting yourself in the shoes of your students and going through, like sit through orientation. What is that like for your students? Just trying to understand what your students, how they're experiencing your institution, and talking with them. I love a focus group.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think your passion for the student experience clearly shines through there, and I think there's some really nice things that listeners can take away. I suppose building on that, because you have held a number of leadership positions, and I also won an award for your passion and creativity in leadership. I'm interested in hearing a little more on your thoughts on leadership, because it obviously is really important that students have that sense of belonging, the sense that they matter. But for staff and for advisors, that's really important as well. So just interested in hearing your approach and to leadership, Karen.
Well, Colin, I think when I think about leadership, I always think about when I was a frontline advisor, and I would look at leaders, like the people who I aspired to be. And I think in life you need to have two types of mentors who are at your level, that you're kind of pushing each other along, and then your aspirational mentors, the people you aspire to be like. And I would look at things and I would often think, like, that's not the way I want to handle it. That's not how I want to do it. That's what can I learn from that experience that later on I can use. And so when it came to leadership, I think part of it is I am fascinated by people's stories. I'm a qualitative narrative data person. I love people's stories. I'm happy to sit on a plane and chat with somebody and find out their life story. I love stories, and I love student stories, but I also love the staff stories too. What are their experiences? And recognizing that as you go through life, there are times, you talk Lee Neffelkamp's sort of seasons of faculty life, where she talks about there are times where you are fully engaged, and then there may be times where you have to pull back a bit because of other things happening in your life, and sort of giving yourself that grace to be able to do that and how important that is. So I always think about leadership is not about you. It's about what can you do for the people who are part of your team, and also other teams around campus, because you can't exist in a silo. You have to work with folks across campus. So it's always like, how can I help somebody else? What can I do to help them get what they're trying to get done? Are there ways that as a team we can come together? So I've always liked a very democratic approach. I want to hear everybody's points of view, because I think I recognized early on that if you hear differing points of view, you're going to come up with something better than if you just are listening to yourself and doing what you think is right. If you get differing points of view, you can create something much better from that. So the other thing too, I think in leadership and in working with different teams, is just recognizing that people have lives outside of the office. And so, years ago, when I worked at Western, we used to do like a December dinner that we would do. And at that time, everybody on staff, their kids were grown. And so we would go to a nice restaurant. And then I suddenly had, have change and turnover, and I suddenly had younger staff and they were having children. And so we kind of adapted things to have, we brought Santa in and we had toys for the kids and we did things. And so some of it is just recognizing that people have a life outside the office and respecting that, and, letting people know that their voices are heard, their voices are valued, that your door is open to them. One of my other philosophies is that if I am on campus, I am fair game. My door is open. There's very few times you would ever find my door closed, and that would usually be if I was meeting with a student on something, because you want people to be able to come in and share with you and talk things through. So I think when I think of leadership, I think about humility. I think about serving. What can I do for the team? How can I help them? How can I support them in their goals, whether they're professional or personal goals that they have?
All great tips. And you mentioned stories, and this is getting posted in June, and Charlie Nutt's retiring. Do you have any stories that you could share about Charlie?
I do. I have a ton of stories. I'm sure some of them he would not want me to share. They are funny. So maybe after he's retired, we'll do a repeat and do that. But, I told you the one about him sitting in the back row at UCAT, giving me the thumbs up, which was appreciated. But, when I think about Charlie, I think about a leader who is very humble, who works from a place of humility and care. He's always focused on the members. It's never about Charlie, and sometimes you will come across somebody who is like, they want to be the center star attraction, and that's never Charlie. He wants the members to be the star attractions, and that he cares, I think, so much behind the scenes, what people don't know. So I can remember, I'm going to give you 2 examples, and then I'll give you a funny story about him. But, I told you I had COVID in November. So I've just moved here, haven't really made any connections beyond the EO because I'm working from home, and you can't at this time. And I got COVID and was very ill. And Charlie was, great boss, was checking in daily with me, but he went beyond that. There got a point where I was so ill, I could barely get up. And Charlie was taking my dog for a walk. So if you can imagine, he's handling association business, talking to members all around the world, and he's walking my dog in November. That's just, to me, that's such a great, he was getting groceries for me and leaving them on the doorstep. And, just that sort of that care that he has. And I know he's done that, when he finds out about a member, if they're, have a family member who's ill and he's calling them, what can we do? How can we support you? But one of the things I do remember, this is many years ago at Region 8, was not a very big region at that time. So we had maybe about 175, 200 people at a conference in Portland, and Charlie was there for it. And as you know, Charlie, he's very engaging. He's very dynamic when he talks. He's using his hands. And he was walking down a hotel hallway with 2 brand new members. So, we were excited. These were new folks. And he's totally engaged with them. And, he's got his cup of coffee. So he's revved up on caffeine. And he walks into a pillar and tosses the coffee all over the new members. And, and I will say, my response was probably not the best response. I was like, Charlie, we can't kill off our members. This is not good. But he at a presentation later in the day when everybody was there, he called them up on the stage. He told people the story, and he gave them each a gift and apologized for that. But that's just Charlie. That's who he is. He can laugh at himself, but he does get so involved, he just forgets everything around him.
I think absolutely. Firstly, the story about like just how caring and compassionate he is, and then the Charlie Nutt story. So thank you for sharing that. And I suppose I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit, because by the time this gets posted, we will be in the run-up to the international conference. And you have had the opportunity to be at some of the international conferences. That's when I first met you. I suppose interested in any stories from international conferences past as we look forward to this year's kind of virtual event.
Are you talking Charlie stories or just?
No, I did not. It doesn't have to be, but Karen Sullivan-Vance stories.
Now you're gonna make me try and jog my memory. I would say, I've been to all of the international ones with the exception of Qatar, even as far back as 2007 when we had the very first joint one with the Higher Ed Association in the UK. I can remember. I won't say the city, but it's a place that's near and dear to my heart. It's a country near and dear to my heart, so you'll be able to figure that out. But I can remember I was so cold, and it was March. It was not. We managed to have snow, sunshine, and rain all in the same day. I was so cold that I actually had to borrow a scarf from Oscar's wife, Bertine, to stay warm because it was so cold inside, not outside. It was so cold. So I realized at that point that, I probably wasn't as hardy as I thought I was. But we've had a lot of fun looking at different sites, back in the day, different locations. We almost missed a train in Birmingham, and basically we're running through the train station. So if you can envision Charlie, Rhonda, myself, I think there was somebody else with us, as we're all sort of like running through a train station to try and catch a train. trundling our luggage. And so, yeah. But there's been some fun. I mean, Colin, what's great is that every international conference has its own vibe and feeling to it. And, Dublin was fantastic. It was such a wonderful event. We had so much fun at it. There was a lot of learning. It was really cool. Sheffield was great. Hasselt was great. And the very first one in Maastricht really sort of set the tone for that chance to just get to talk to other people. That's the one thing I would say is really nice about the international conference. It's smaller. And so people are really engaging, and not that they're not engaging at annual, they are, but it's that opportunity to really talk to people around the world about, how are you handling academic advising? How are you handling the pandemic right now? What are you doing differently? How are you changing what you do?
Yeah, it's definitely a different dynamic. And I think you get a little bit more personal. It's a little more intimate at those international conferences. And I'm just trying to imagine all of you running at the train station. The only thing that comes to mind is Home Alone 2, where the family's running in the airport to try to catch the plane, and they leave poor Macaulay Culkin all by himself. So,
well, it was a little bit of Lord of the Flies in terms of every person for themselves as we were trying. And I forget the member's name. He's retired from advising now, but he was literally chucking our luggage on as the train was moving. And if you know Charlie, Charlie is beautiful fashion sense and his love of shoes. And Charlie and I share a love of shoes for the look of shoes, not always for the comfort of shoes. So I think I also remember we were not wearing very comfortable shoes at that time.
And if anyone listening has any questions or wants to get in contact, how can they reach out to you?
So just ksvance@ksu.edu, or they can go on the NACADA website and look under the executive office. But, I think the great thing is we have new advisors coming into the field, and we have mid-level advisors and administrators. There's always ways that you can get involved, and you can do it you want to learn something, you want to take something back to your campus, you want to work on your own personal and professional development. There's just so many great ways you can get involved, and not to stop yourself, not to limit yourself. I think that, one of the very first things I ever did was I wrote a book review. And because that whole thing about writing a book or writing a chapter, it just seems a little bit overwhelming. But a book review, 450 words, I could handle that. Or you do a presentation, and then you move on and you start doing more presentations. So there's so many great ways you can serve on committees and get involved with the advising communities. There's just great ways that you can get involved. And everyone, I want people to feel welcome, and I want them to feel connected to NACADA, because there's so much good work that is being done around the globe. And if we share with each other what we're doing, that just benefits students. And at the end of the day, it comes back to the students. How do we help our students? And especially right now, how do we help this generation of students who have had this very disruptive event happen? And in many cases has been incredibly personal in terms of their own sacrifice and their own experiences and losses. So how do we support them? And then how do we support our advisors as well?
I think you have done a wonderful job of highlighting the sense of community that exists within NACADA, the fun that takes place, but also the learning. And I think there's been so much for listeners to take away from this interview, both from learning a little bit about you, and I think that humanizing that story, hearing about how you found your way into higher ed was really lovely, leading on to all your insights into leadership and how to best, help our students. So, Karen, thank you very much for taking the time to chat to myself and Matt today.
Thank you, Colin and Matt, for this opportunity. It's great to see you both. And thank you to everyone who listens, and keep on advising. Keep on out there advising, and know that we support you and we're here to help you.